Redwood Falls, Minnesota, was the kind of place many people dream of but few ever find. It was a town where the rhythm of life was dictated by the changing seasons, not by the relentless pulse of a metropolis. Here, neighbors were not strangers, they were familiar faces you saw at the local grocery store, the school bake sale, or the Friday night football game. Children rode their bicycles down quiet tree-lined streets until dusk, their laughter echoing in the warm summer air. The community was built on a foundation of shared values, mutual trust, and the quiet comfort that comes from knowing you belong. It was a place defined by its predictability, a sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world. Nothing truly terrible ever happened in Redwood Falls, or so everyone believed. This sense of security was woven into the very fabric of the town. People left their doors unlocked, confident that the only visitors they might receive would be friends dropping by for a chat. The local police force dealt with little more than the occasional traffic violation or a lost pet, their presence more of a reassurance than a necessity. The town's heartbeat was slow and steady, a gentle drumbeat of ordinary life. It was a place where stories were passed down through generations, where family histories intertwined like the roots of the ancient redwood trees that gave the town its name. This was the backdrop against which life unfolded, a picturesque canvas of small-town America, serene and seemingly untouched by the darkness that lurked elsewhere. The people of Redwood Falls took pride in their idyllic existence. They celebrated their community with annual festivals, parades, and potluck dinners, each event reinforcing the bonds that held them together. The fire station, a handsome brick building in the center of town, was more than just a base for emergency services, it was a symbol of that communal spirit. The firefighters were local heroes, men and women who had grown up in the town and dedicated their lives to protecting it. They were figures of respect and admiration, pillars of the community whose bravery was a source of collective pride. Their presence was a constant reminder that in Redwood Falls, people looked out for one another. But beneath the surface of this tranquil facade, a current of unease was about to be unleashed. The very foundations of trust and safety that defined Redwood Falls were about to be shattered by an event so shocking, so inexplicable, that it would forever alter the town's perception of itself. The peace was fragile, a thin veneer that would be ripped away to reveal a complex and disturbing reality. A story was about to begin, one that would not only captivate the town but an entire nation. It was a story that started with a single, jarring event, the disappearance of one of their most beloved residents, a man everyone thought they knew. Travis Decker was the embodiment of the Redwood Falls ideal. He was more than just a firefighter, he was a friend, a neighbor, a devoted father, and a loving husband. With a warm smile that could disarm even the most cynical stranger, he was a familiar and comforting presence throughout the town. People knew him not only for his bravery in the face of danger, but for his kindness and willingness to lend a hand. Whether he was coaching his son's Little League team, or helping an elderly resident with their garden, Travis was deeply integrated into the community's daily life. He was a decorated member of the Redwood Falls Fire Department, a man who had risked his own life countless times to save others. He was, in every sense of the word, a local hero. His life appeared to be as picture-perfect as the town he served. He lived in a charming suburban home with his wife Meredith and their 2 young children. Photos shared on social media painted a portrait of domestic bliss, family holidays, birthday parties, and quiet moments spent together. Travis was seen as the quintessential family man, a steady and reliable figure who provided for and protected his loved ones. His colleagues at the fire station respected him, his neighbors adored him, and his family was the center of his world. There was nothing in his public persona to suggest that anything was amiss, no hint of the storm that was gathering just over the horizon. His life was an open book, or so it seemed. Then came July 16th, 2025. It was a day that began like any other but would end in bewilderment and fear. Travis finished his shift at the fire station, said his goodbyes to his colleagues, and presumably headed home, but he never arrived. As the hours stretched into a long, anxious night, a sense of dread began to creep into the Decker household. Meredith's calls to his mobile phone went unanswered. His friends and fellow firefighters had not heard from him. The man who was always so dependable, so punctual, had simply vanished. The initial worry soon escalated into full-blown panic as the realization dawned that this was not a simple delay. Something was terribly wrong. The next morning, the first piece of the puzzle emerged, but it only deepened the mystery. Travis Decker's truck was discovered abandoned at a remote trailhead on the outskirts of town, a popular spot for hikers and nature lovers. The discovery sent a chill through the community. The keys were still in the ignition, a silent testament to a hasty departure or a sudden interruption. His mobile phone and wallet were left on the passenger seat, untouched. It was as if he had stepped out of his vehicle for a moment and had been swallowed by the dense woods that bordered the trail. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood, nothing to explain his absence, just an empty truck and a silence that was deafening. Travis Decker was gone. The news of Travis Decker's disappearance spread through Redwood Falls like wildfire. What began as a ripple of concern among his immediate circle quickly grew into a tidal wave of collective shock and disbelief. This was not the kind of thing that happened here. Missing persons were subjects of late-night news reports from distant cities, not a reality that struck at the heart of their own community. The abandoned truck at the trailhead became a chilling symbol of their shattered peace. The quiet woods, once a source of recreation and tranquility, now seemed ominous and threatening. An unspoken fear settled over the town, a heavy blanket of anxiety that touched every resident. If a man like Travis could vanish without a trace, was anyone truly safe? The response from the community was immediate and overwhelming. In the face of uncertainty, the people of Redwood Falls did what they had always done. They came together. Hundreds of volunteers, from seasoned hikers to concerned parents, mobilized to search the sprawling forests surrounding the trailhead. They formed search parties that combed through the dense undergrowth, their voices calling out his name, hoping for a response that never came. Local businesses closed their doors so that employees could join the effort, while others donated food and water to sustain the searchers. The town was united in a single, desperate mission to find one of their own and bring him home. The official search was a massive operation. Law enforcement agencies from across the state descended on Redwood Falls, bringing with them specialized equipment and expertise. Drones buzzed overhead, their cameras scanning the vast terrain from above. K-9 units, their dogs trained to pick up the faintest scent, tirelessly tracked through the woods, their handlers following close behind. The fire station became a temporary command center, a hub of frantic activity where maps were scrutinized and strategies were planned. Despite the scale of the search and the sheer number of people involved, every lead went cold. Every path led to a dead end. The forest held its secrets close, offering no clues to Travis Decker's whereabouts. As days turned into a week, the initial hope began to curdle into a gnawing despair. Missing person flyers bearing Travis's smiling face were plastered on every shop window, lamppost, and community notice board. Candlelight vigils were held in the town square where residents gathered in somber silence, their flickering flames a testament to their dwindling hope. The local media covered the story relentlessly, their cameras capturing the raw emotion of a town in crisis. His wife, Meredith, made a tearful public plea for his safe return, her voice trembling as she begged for any information that could help find her husband. The whole town watched, their hearts breaking for her and her children, sharing in the agony of not knowing. What started as a local tragedy soon captured the attention of the entire nation. The story of the heroic firefighter who vanished from a sleepy, idyllic town was compelling and deeply unsettling. National news networks began dispatching their own reporters to Redwood Falls, turning the small town into an unlikely media epicenter. The case had all the elements of a gripping mystery, a beloved family man, a pristine community, and a complete lack of evidence. It resonated with a public fascinated by true crime, and soon the name Travis Decker was on the lips of millions who had never even heard of Redwood Falls before. The town's private grief was now a public spectacle. The intense media scrutiny brought with it a new level of pressure on the investigation. Every move made by the local police and the FBI who had been called in to assist was analyzed and debated on television programs and online forums. The story became a fixture of the 24-hour news cycle, with experts and armchair detectives alike offering their theories on what might have happened. Was it a tragic accident, a kidnapping, or was there something more sinister at play? The narrative of a simple man who disappeared was beginning to fracture, replaced by a far more complex and murky picture. The search for Travis Decker was no longer just a search for a missing person, it was a search for the truth. Behind the scenes, away from the glare of the cameras, investigators were starting to uncover details that did not align with the public image of Travis Decker. They began to dig into his life, peeling back the layers of his seemingly perfect existence. They scrutinized his financial records, his phone logs, and his relationships, searching for any anomaly that might provide a clue. It was during this painstaking process that the first red flags began to appear. small inconsistencies at first, then larger, more troubling discoveries. The investigation was quietly shifting direction, moving away from the theory of a random accident or abduction, and towards something far more personal and calculated. The disappearance of Travis Decker had evolved into a full-blown national mystery. Social media platforms buzzed with speculation, with Reddit threads and TikTok videos dissecting every piece of available information. Amateur sleuths created elaborate timelines and pointed fingers, often based on little more than rumor and conjecture. The case became a vortex of information and misinformation, pulling in everyone who heard the story. For the residents of Redwood Falls, this new reality was disorienting. Their town was now the setting for a real-life drama, and they were all unwilling characters in a story whose ending was unknown. The hunt for Travis Decker had begun, but no one could have predicted the dark and twisted path it would ultimately take. To understand the shockwave that followed Travis Decker's disappearance, one must first appreciate the life he had so carefully constructed. In the eyes of Redwood Falls, Travis was the gold standard of a modern family man, a pillar of strength and dependability. His marriage to Meredith was often cited by friends as aspirational. They were the couple who still held hands, who seemed genuinely to enjoy each other's company after years together. Their home, a well-kept two-story house with a sprawling back garden, was the epicenter of their world. It was a place filled with the sounds of their children's laughter, the scent of freshly cut grass in the summer, and the warmth of a crackling fire in the winter. Travis was the architect of this idyllic scene, a man who appeared to derive his greatest joy from providing for and protecting his family. He was a man of routine and discipline, qualities that served him well both at home and at the fire station. His colleagues knew him as the first to arrive and the last to leave, an individual who never cut corners and took immense pride in his work. This dedication extended to his personal life. He was an avid runner, often seen jogging through the town's streets in the early morning mist before the rest of the world had stirred. Physically fit and mentally sharp, he projected an aura of unshakable competence. He was the person you would want by your side in a crisis, calm and decisive. This public image was not a performance. It was, as far as anyone could tell, the genuine article. Travis Decker was a good man, living a good life. Beyond his roles as a husband, father, and firefighter, Travis was an active and engaged member of the community. He volunteered his time without hesitation, believing deeply in the importance of service. He could be found coaching the local youth football team on weekends, patiently teaching the children the value of teamwork and perseverance. At town fundraisers, he was often the one manning the grill, his easygoing charm making him a natural focal point of any social gathering. His connections within Redwood Falls were extensive and deeply rooted, built over years of shared experiences and mutual respect. He was not just a resident, he was part of the town's very soul, a man whose presence made the community feel stronger and safer. This carefully curated existence, this portrait of perfection, is precisely what made his vanishing so profoundly unsettling. It defied all logic. Men like Travis Decker did not simply disappear, they did not abandon their families, their responsibilities, or the lives they had worked so hard to build. The initial theories leaned towards foul play because any other explanation seemed impossible. The community could not reconcile the image of the devoted family man with the idea of someone who would voluntarily walk away. The stability he represented was a reflection of the town's own self-image, and his absence created a fracture in that reflection, revealing a disturbing void where certainty used to be. The perfect life, it seemed, was the perfect cover. The morning of July 16, 2025, began like any other for the Decker family in Redwood Falls. Travis went for his usual run, returned for a lively family breakfast, and left for his shift at the fire station. At work, he was his dependable self, training, joking with colleagues, nothing out of the ordinary. He finished his shift, chatted briefly about weekend plans, and left the station at 8:15 a.m. on July 17th. Security footage showed him driving away in his blue Ford F-150, the last confirmed sighting of Travis Decker. There were no warnings, no signs, just the quiet end of another ordinary day. Meredith expected Travis home by 8:45 a.m., but he never arrived. Her texts and calls went unanswered. His phone was off, which was unlike him. By midday, concern turned to panic as friends and colleagues reported no contact. The unanswered calls became a chilling alarm. At 2 p.m., Meredith reported Travis missing to the police, her voice trembling with fear and disbelief. The investigation began immediately, the silence on Travis's phone now echoing his sudden, inexplicable absence. The ordinary had become unthinkable. Police searching for Travis found his blue F-150 at the remote Black Creek trailhead, nowhere near his usual route. The truck was unlocked, keys in the ignition, wallet and phone left behind. No signs of struggle, only Travis's and his family's fingerprints. The scene was pristine, offering no clues. Just more questions. Friends couldn't explain why he'd be there after a long shift. The truck's discovery deepened the mystery, turning confusion into dread. Search teams combed the dense Black Creek forest, calling Travis's name into the wilderness. K-9 units briefly picked up his scent, but it vanished near a creek. Drones and volunteers found nothing. No trace, no evidence. The forest's silence was overwhelming, fueling fears of something more sinister. The theory of a lost hiker faded. Darker possibilities took hold. The silence screamed of a disappearance that was anything but accidental. News of Travis's disappearance shook Redwood Falls to its core. The town rallied, hundreds joined the search, businesses donated supplies and flyers appeared everywhere. Candlelight vigils lit up the nights, hope mingling with dread. The fire station, once a place of camaraderie, was now heavy with grief. The search for Travis became a search for lost security and answers. The crisis bound the community together, even as fear settled in. What began as a local tragedy soon spiraled into a national media event. The narrative of a heroic firefighter vanishing from an idyllic American town proved irresistible to the 24-hour news cycle. Satellite trucks with large antennas descended upon Redwood Falls, transforming the quiet streets around the police station and the trailhead into a bustling media encampment. Reporters with microphones and cameras became a common sight, conducting interviews with anyone willing to speak, their questions echoing the nation's growing fascination with the case. The town's private pain was suddenly broadcast into millions of homes, turning their community into the setting for a real-life mystery drama. Redwood Falls was no longer just a town, it was a dateline. This intense media scrutiny brought with it a suffocating pressure. The local police, unaccustomed to such a high-profile investigation, found their every action scrutinized and analyzed by a legion of television pundits and crime commentators. The daily press briefings became tense, carefully managed events, with Sheriff Brody facing a barrage of questions he often could not answer. The constant presence of the cameras created a fishbowl effect, where every resident felt as though they were under a microscope. The town's grief was now a spectacle, its fear a commodity. For many in Redwood Falls, the media invasion felt like a second violation, an intrusion that complicated their mourning and disrupted the very fabric of their close-knit community. The story of Travis Decker became a canvas onto which the public projected its own fears and theories. It was perfect fodder for the burgeoning world of online true crime communities. Reddit threads exploded with activity, with amateur sleuths piecing together timelines, analyzing maps of the search area, and debating the significance of every small detail. TikTok creators and YouTube channels produced countless videos dissecting the case, often blending factual reporting with wild speculation. This digital firestorm created a parallel investigation, one that operated without rules or accountability. While it amplified awareness, it also muddied the waters with misinformation and unfounded rumors, making the truth even harder to discern for those on the ground. At the center of this swirling vortex of attention was Travis's wife, Meredith. She gave a single, emotional press conference in the early days, her voice trembling as she pleaded for her husband's return. Surrounded by family, she presented the image of a heartbroken wife, desperate for answers. Her performance, as some would later call it, was broadcast across the nation, eliciting a wave of public sympathy. She was the grieving spouse, the distraught mother, the tragic figure at the heart of the story. Her face became as recognizable as her husband's. But as the days passed and the cameras remained fixed upon her, the public's perception, and that of the investigators, was about to undergo a dramatic and unsettling shift. While the public saw a town united in its search for a lost hero, behind the scenes, a different narrative was beginning to take shape. Investigators, frustrated by the complete lack of physical evidence in the forest, began to look more closely at the human elements of the case. They started re-interviewing friends, colleagues, and neighbors, digging deeper into the Deckers' lives. It was during these quiet, confidential conversations that the first subtle dissonances emerged. Small remarks, offhand comments, and anecdotes that, when viewed in isolation seemed insignificant, began to form a faint but troubling pattern. The picture-perfect image of Travis and Meredith's life started to show microscopic fractures under the intense pressure of the investigation. The focus inevitably sharpened on Meredith Decker. Her public persona was that of a devastated wife, but her behavior away from the cameras was raising eyebrows among the detectives assigned to the case. They noted her composure during interviews, a calmness that seemed at odds with the frantic terror one might expect from a woman whose husband had vanished. She rarely initiated contact with the police to ask for updates, a passivity that struck the seasoned investigators as unusual. While everyone grieves differently, Meredith's apparent detachment was a red flag, a deviation from the expected script of spousal anguish. The whispers began among the law enforcement team. Was her calm a sign of shock, or something else entirely? The search efforts themselves provided further cause for suspicion. While hundreds of volunteers combed the woods, Meredith was conspicuously absent from the trailhead command post. She remained at home, shielded from the media and the public, citing the need to be there for her children. It was an understandable explanation, one that many in the community accepted without question. However, for the investigators, it was another piece that didn't quite fit. They had seen countless family members of missing persons who were unable to tear themselves away from the center of the search, needing to be as close as possible to the action. Meredith's choice to remain distant felt deliberate, a conscious separation from the desperate, hopeful energy of the search parties. These observations, initially just quiet concerns shared between detectives, began to coalesce into a tangible line of inquiry. The investigation started to pivot, slowly and silently, away from the woods and towards the Decker family home. The theory of a random accident or abduction was still on the table, but a new, more sinister possibility was gaining ground. That Travis Decker's disappearance was not the result of an external act, but of something that had originated much closer to home. The whispers that had started in the forest were now echoing down the quiet suburban street where the Deckers lived, suggesting the biggest clues were not to be found among the trees but behind a closed front door. The first significant crack in Meredith's facade appeared when investigators requested access to her and Travis's personal electronic devices. They sought her cooperation to examine their mobile phones and laptops, explaining it was standard procedure to build a timeline of Travis's last known activities and communications. Meredith initially agreed but became hesitant and slightly defensive when pressed for passwords. She claimed she didn't know all of Travis's login details and was protective of her own privacy. This reluctance, while perhaps understandable on a personal level, was a major obstacle for the police. It created a delay and sowed a seed of doubt. If she had nothing to hide, why wouldn't she offer unfettered access to help find her husband? This hesitation was compounded by another curious observation. Investigators noted that Meredith had not requested to see the security footage from the fire station that showed Travis leaving for the last time. It was a piece of evidence that most loved ones would be desperate to see, to catch a final glimpse, to analyze his expression or demeanor for any sign of distress. Her lack of interest was perplexing. It suggested a disengagement from the details of the investigation, a departure from the typical behavior of a frantic spouse. To the detectives, it felt less like grief-stricken denial and more like a deliberate avoidance of the facts, as if she already knew a story that the footage could not tell her. The financial aspect of the Deckers' lives also began to reveal troubling inconsistencies. A preliminary review of their bank accounts obtained via a warrant hinted at recent financial strain. While they maintained the appearance of a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle, there were signs of significant debt, and several recent, large cash withdrawals made by Meredith in the weeks leading up to Travis's disappearance. When questioned about these transactions, her explanations were vague and evasive. This discovery directly contradicted the idyllic image the couple had projected. It introduced a potential motive that had been absent before: money. The tranquil surface of their marriage was now rippling with the undercurrents of financial secrecy and stress. The community, for the most part, remained fiercely loyal to Meredith, seeing her as a victim of both a terrible tragedy and an intrusive media. They were protective of the grieving wife and her children. But within the inner circle of the investigation, the perception had irrevocably shifted. The accumulation of odd behaviors, the reluctance to cooperate fully, and the emerging financial secrets painted a picture of a woman who was not being entirely truthful. The cracks in her story were becoming impossible to ignore. The investigation was no longer just about finding Travis Decker, It was now about understanding the complex and potentially deceptive world he had left behind. The town was reacting with sympathy, but the police were reacting with suspicion. As the search in the woods continued to yield nothing but frustration, investigators turned their attention back to the last place Travis Decker was definitively seen, the Redwood Falls Fire Station. They hoped to find something, anything, that might offer a glimpse into his state of mind or his plans for that fateful day. Detectives returned to the station with a warrant, intending to conduct a thorough search of his personal locker, a small space that often serves as a firefighter's private sanctuary. His colleagues watched with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, still struggling to reconcile the man they knew with the mystery he had become. They expected to find the usual collection of personal items, a spare change of clothes, toiletries, maybe a book or a few family photos. What they found instead was a chilling void. When the bolt cutters snapped the padlock and the metal door swung open, it revealed a space that was almost completely bare. There was no spare uniform, no worn-out boots, no dog-eared paperback. The hooks were empty, the shelf was clear. The only items left inside were a single, generic bar of soap still in its wrapper and a worn-out department-issued towel. It was as if the locker had been methodically and deliberately sanitized, stripped of any personal connection to the man who had used it for years. This was not the locker of a man who intended to return for his next shift. It was the locker of someone who was planning a permanent departure. The discovery sent a ripple of unease through the investigative team. It was a significant red flag, a piece of physical evidence that directly contradicted the narrative of a spontaneous disappearance. Cleaning out a locker is a conscious act, one that requires forethought and planning. It suggested that Travis's vanishing was not the result of a sudden whim or a violent abduction at the trailhead. Instead, it pointed towards a premeditated event, a departure that he had been contemplating for some time. The empty locker was a silent, powerful statement. It was a goodbye that he had enacted in private, long before his truck was found and the first search parties were assembled. This revelation forced investigators to recalibrate their entire approach. They were no longer just looking for a missing person. They were potentially looking for a fugitive. The question shifted from what happened to Travis, to what was Travis running from. His colleagues were stunned by the news. They recalled seeing him at his locker before he left, but no one had noticed him carrying anything more than his usual duffel bag. He had performed this final act of erasure with such subtlety that it had gone completely unnoticed. The empty locker was the first concrete clue that Travis Decker himself was an active participant in his own disappearance, a willing architect of the mystery that was now consuming the town. With the investigation now delving deeper into Travis's personal life, detectives focused their efforts on his digital footprint. They obtained a court order for his mobile phone records, hoping to construct a detailed picture of his communications in the days and weeks leading up to his disappearance. The data, when it arrived, was a dense matrix of calls and texts, a digital echo of his life. For the most part, the records were unremarkable, showing frequent contact with Meredith, his children, and his colleagues at the fire station. It was a pattern of communication consistent with the life of a dedicated family man and firefighter. But buried within the mundane data was a single glaring anomaly that immediately caught their attention. The final phone call Travis received before his phone was presumably switched off or lost power was on the morning he vanished, shortly after he left the station. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. The troubling part was not the timing but the origin. The incoming number was blocked, a feature often used to maintain anonymity. In an era where almost every caller is identified, a blocked number stands out. It suggests a conversation that someone did not want to be traced. Investigators tried to work with the phone company to unmask the number, but the technological hurdles were significant. The call was a digital dead end, a whisper from the shadows that hinted at a hidden aspect of Travis's life. This mysterious call became a focal point of the investigation. Who would have been calling Travis from a blocked number on the very morning he disappeared? And why the need for such secrecy? The call's short duration suggested it was likely for conveying a quick piece of information or a final confirmation, rather than a lengthy conversation. Investigators theorized it could have been a prearranged signal, a final go-ahead for a plan that was already in motion. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. It occurred during the crucial window between him leaving the fire station and his truck being abandoned at the trailhead, a period where his actions were completely unaccounted for. The existence of this call added another layer of complexity to the puzzle. It was the second major red flag, alongside the empty locker, that pointed towards a deliberate and planned disappearance. It also suggested the possibility of an accomplice. Was Travis acting alone, or was someone else involved in orchestrating his vanishing act? The blocked call was a tantalizing clue that led nowhere, a source of immense frustration for the police. It was a ghost in the machine, a fleeting connection to a secret world that Travis had carefully concealed from everyone around him. The call from nowhere suggested he was not just running from something, he might have been running to someone. As detectives scrutinized the Deckers' lives, they inevitably turned to their financial arrangements, a standard but often revealing part of any major investigation. They began looking into insurance policies, mortgages, and investments, searching for any unusual activity that might suggest a motive. It was during this painstaking financial audit that they uncovered the bombshell that would irrevocably alter the course of the case and cast a dark shadow of suspicion over Meredith Decker. Just 2 weeks before Travis vanished, a new life insurance policy had been taken out in his name. The policy was substantial, with a payout of $1.2 million in the event of his death. It was a staggering sum for a family with their reported income. The timing of the policy was deeply suspicious. Taking out a massive life insurance policy just days before a person disappears is a red flag of the highest order. It was too coincidental to be ignored. Investigators immediately dug deeper, pulling the paperwork for the policy. The application had been completed online and the initial premium had been paid from a joint account. While Travis's digital signature was on the document, the primary email address listed for correspondence was one belonging to Meredith. This detail was crucial. It suggested that she was not only aware of the policy, but was likely the driving force behind its creation. The $1 million payout was a powerful potential motive for foul play. The beneficiary of this new lucrative policy was Meredith Decker. If Travis were to be declared legally dead, she stood to gain a fortune. This discovery shifted the focus of the investigation squarely onto her. Her calm demeanor, her reluctance to cooperate fully, and her distance from the search efforts were now seen in a new, more sinister light. Was it possible that she had orchestrated her husband's disappearance, or worse, his murder for financial gain? The theory seemed almost too diabolical to be true, especially in a place like Redwood Falls. But the evidence was compelling. The life insurance policy created a clear and understandable motive where none had existed before. When confronted with this information, Meredith did not deny the policy's existence. She claimed it was Travis's idea, that he had become increasingly worried about the dangers of his job and wanted to ensure his family would be financially secure if anything happened to him. She portrayed it as a responsible act of a loving husband and father. However, her explanation did little to quell the suspicions of the investigators. The proximity of the policy's activation to his disappearance was a statistical improbability that defied easy explanation. The $1 million question hung in the air, transforming Meredith from a grieving wife into a potential suspect in the eyes of the law. The discovery of the life insurance policy was just the tip of the iceberg. As investigators delved deeper into the Deckers' finances, they uncovered a complex web of deceit that starkly contrasted with their public image of comfortable suburban life. The family was in far more financial trouble than anyone knew. They were carrying significant credit card debt across multiple cards, several of which were maxed out. There was also a second mortgage on their home that friends and family were unaware of. The idyllic life they presented to the world was being financed by a precarious mountain of debt, a reality that created immense underlying pressure within the marriage. Bank statements revealed a pattern of behavior that was equally troubling. In the 3 months leading up to Travis's disappearance, Meredith had made a series of large cash withdrawals from their joint savings account, totaling over $15,000. When police questioned her about these transactions, her answers were vague and inconsistent. First, she claimed the money was for home renovations, but there was no evidence of any recent work being done on the house. Later, she suggested it was to pay off a personal loan, but she could not provide any details about the lender or the terms. The money had seemingly vanished without a trace, much like her husband. This financial turmoil provided a powerful context for the $1 million life insurance policy. It was no longer just a suspicious anomaly, it was a potential solution to a desperate financial situation. The $1.2 million payout would not only have cleared their debts, but would have set Meredith up for a comfortable life. The theory that she may have been involved in her husband's disappearance for financial gain became increasingly plausible. The large cash withdrawals also raised new questions. Was she using the money to pay someone to help her? Or was she funneling it somewhere in preparation for a new life, one without her husband and their shared financial burdens? The financial red flags created a compelling, if circumstantial, case against Meredith. However, they also complicated the narrative of Travis as a willing participant in his own disappearance. If he had planned to run away, why would he agree to a life insurance policy that would only benefit Meredith after he was gone? And if they were in financial trouble together, why would he abandon her to deal with the debt? The financial deceit seemed to be a game played by both of them, or perhaps against each other. The investigation was uncovering a marriage that was not built on trust and love, but on secrets, lies, and a desperate need for money. The investigation had now uncovered significant red flags pointing in two completely different directions. On one hand, the evidence suggested that Travis Decker had meticulously planned his own disappearance. The empty locker was a clear sign of premeditation, an act of erasing his presence before he had even left. The mysterious blocked phone call on the morning he vanished hinted at a coordinated plan, possibly involving an unknown accomplice. These clues painted the picture of a man who wanted to escape his life, a man who had staged his own vanishing act with careful precision. He was not a victim in the traditional sense, he was the orchestrator of the entire mystery. On the other hand, a compelling body of evidence pointed towards his wife, Meredith. The massive, recently acquired life insurance policy, with her as the sole beneficiary, provided a powerful financial motive. Her strange lack of emotion, her reluctance to cooperate with police, and her distance from the search efforts all contributed to a growing cloud of suspicion. The discovery of the family's hidden financial distress and her unexplained cash withdrawals added fuel to the fire. This evidence suggested a darker narrative, one in which Meredith, facing financial ruin, might have engineered her husband's disappearance, or worse, to collect the insurance payout. She was not a grieving widow. She was a potential suspect. These two contradictory narratives created a perplexing dilemma for investigators. Was this a case of a man staging his disappearance, or a wife orchestrating a murder for money? It was also possible that the truth was a complex combination of both. Perhaps they had planned the disappearance together as a bizarre and illegal solution to their financial woes, intending for Travis to hide while Meredith eventually collected the insurance money. This theory would account for both the empty locker and the insurance policy, but it was a conspiracy that would require immense nerve and a flawless execution that, frankly, seemed to be unraveling under scrutiny. The case was now a tangled mess of inconsistencies and conflicting evidence. Every red flag that pointed to Travis was countered by one that pointed to Meredith. Investigators were faced with two primary suspects, each with their own secrets and potential motives. The public, fed a steady diet of these revelations by the media, was equally divided. Was Travis a cunning runaway who had duped everyone, or was he the victim of a cold and calculating plot hatched by his own wife? The search for the truth was no longer a simple matter of finding a missing man. It was about untangling the toxic secrets of a marriage that had imploded, leaving a trail of deception in its wake. As investigators grappled with the conflicting narratives surrounding Travis and Meredith, they knew the key to unlocking the truth lay somewhere in the secrets Travis had kept. The blocked call was a tantalizing hint that he was communicating outside his known social and familial circles. But it was an electronic dead end. The forensic team decided to dig deeper, moving beyond his known phone records and into the darker corners of his digital life. They conducted a full forensic analysis of the family's home computer, a shared device that sat in their small study. They were searching for hidden files, deleted histories, or any trace of a digital life that Travis had concealed from his wife and the world. It was a painstaking process, sifting through terabytes of mundane data for a single revelatory clue. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place, the computer's registry files. Buried deep within the system's memory, a forensic technician found remnants of a software program that had been installed and then hastily deleted. It was an encrypted messaging application, a type of software designed for secure, untraceable communication, far beyond what a typical family man would need. The discovery was electrifying. This was the modern equivalent of a secret post office box, a clandestine channel through which Travis could have been leading a whole other existence. The program itself was gone, but its digital ghost remained, pointing towards a deliberate effort to hide his conversations from prying eyes, especially those of his wife. This discovery led them to another crucial piece of the puzzle. Cross-referencing installation dates with financial records, they found a small recurring monthly payment to an anonymous hosting service, paid for with a prepaid credit card that was not linked to the family's known bank accounts. Following this money trail, they unearthed evidence that Travis had purchased a second, secret mobile phone, a burner phone. This was the likely source of the encrypted chats and possibly the device that had received the blocked call on the morning he vanished. The existence of a secret phone was definitive proof of a double life. It was a calculated deception, a clear indicator that Travis Decker was hiding something significant. The implications were staggering. Travis had constructed an entirely separate, invisible line of communication. He was not just the family man and heroic firefighter, he was also a man with secrets so deep, he needed military-grade encryption to protect them. The question was no longer simply if he had a secret life, but what that life entailed. Was he involved in criminal activity? Was he communicating with a lover? Or was he planning his escape with an accomplice? The digital ghost on the family computer had opened a new door, and investigators were determined to walk through it and uncover the man Travis Decker had tried so hard to keep hidden in the shadows. The discovery of the secret phone and the encrypted app, well, it gave investigators a whole new, powerful lens through which to view Travis Decker. They began to re-examine his online activity, no longer searching for the man everyone thought they knew, but for a shadow identity he might have created. They started cross-referencing the prepaid credit card details with other online services, a kind of digital fishing expedition, to see what else they could catch. Their search led them eventually to the world of online dating, which, honestly, is a pretty common venue for secret lives. After days of sifting through countless profiles on various platforms, they finally found him. It was a profile on a popular dating site, one that's, known for facilitating discreet encounters. The profile picture was a grainy, dimly lit selfie, but the man's features were unmistakably those of Travis Decker. He wasn't using his real name, though. The profile was registered under the alias Jake Morrison, a generic and untraceable name. The biography he'd written for Jake was, honestly, a work of fiction, a carefully crafted persona designed to attract a certain kind of attention while hiding his true identity. Jake was a single, self-employed consultant who traveled frequently for work, which, well, is a perfect cover story to explain away absences and an erratic schedule. He described himself as adventurous, seeking excitement, and looking for a connection with someone tired of the mundane. It was a stark and unsettling contrast to the public image of the devoted husband and father. The man named Jake was everything Travis Decker was not supposed to be. The profile had been active for over a year, long before any of the known financial troubles or the life insurance policy ever came into play. This wasn't a recent development, it was an established part of his life. Investigators were able to obtain the profile's activity logs from the dating company, and these revealed a history of messages with several different women from across the state and even beyond. He was charming and flirtatious in his communications, playing the role of the mysterious, unattached bachelor with practiced ease. This wasn't just a man looking for an escape, this was a man who had built a second identity and was living it with confidence and skill. The double life was deeper and more entrenched than they ever could have imagined. The discovery of Jake Morrison was a turning point. It proved that Travis wasn't just running from his life in Redwood Falls, he was running toward a fantasy life he'd constructed for himself. The man who coached children's football and rescued people from fires was also a man who lied, cheated, and sought illicit connections online. This revelation painted his disappearance in a whole new light. Maybe his vanishing act wasn't about escaping debt or a troubled marriage, but about finally shedding the skin of Travis Decker to become Jake Morrison full-time. The mystery was no longer just about where he was, but about who he truly was. The digital trail left by Jake Morrison gave investigators their next significant lead. While his communications on the dating site were with multiple women, one conversation really stood out. It was a lengthy and recent exchange with a woman in northern Wisconsin. The tone was more serious, the content more intimate. They talked about meeting, about the future, about finding a place where they could just get away from everything. Buried within these messages was a reference to a quiet spot up north, a place to get away. It was a vague clue, but honestly, it was the first geographical hint investigators had found that pointed away from Redwood Falls and the surrounding area. They immediately shifted their focus to northern Wisconsin. Using the financial records from the prepaid credit card, the very same one used to buy the burner phone, investigators began searching for transactions in that region. They were looking for anything out of the ordinary, any purchase that could be linked to Travis or his alias. After cross-referencing hundreds of small transactions, they founded a series of payments made over several months to a property rental company that specialized in remote, off-grid cabins. The payments were small, made to look like miscellaneous online purchases, but they all traced back to the same company. The name on the rental agreement was, once again, the fictional Jake Morrison. The property was a small, secluded cabin located deep in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, a vast wilderness area in northern Wisconsin, hours away from any major town. It was the perfect hideout, isolated, tough to access, and completely anonymous. The cabin was rented on a month-to-month basis, offering flexibility and no long-term commitment. It was clear that this wasn't just a holiday spot, it was a pre-arranged bolt hole, a place prepared well in advance for a long-term stay. Travis or Jake had been methodically setting up his escape route for months, carefully laying the groundwork for his eventual disappearance. The empty locker now made perfect sense. He'd likely been moving his essential belongings to the cabin piece by piece over time. The discovery of the Wisconsin cabin was the tangible proof they needed. The double life wasn't just a digital fantasy, it had a physical location. Travis had a destination. The theory that he'd met with foul play at the trailhead in Minnesota now seemed almost impossible. He hadn't been taken. He had driven away. He'd likely used a second vehicle or maybe been picked up by an accomplice to make the journey to his prepared sanctuary. The question that had haunted the town of Redwood Falls, "Where is Travis Decker?" finally had a potential answer. He was hundreds of miles away, living under a false name in a cabin in the woods, waiting for the search to die down so he could begin his new life. Armed with the location of the cabin, the FBI, who had now taken a leading role in the interstate investigation, moved quickly. They didn't want to rush in and risk Travis fleeing again. He'd proven himself to be cautious and meticulous, and a direct approach could easily spook him. Instead, they chose a period of covert surveillance. A small disguised team of federal agents was dispatched to the remote area in Wisconsin. They set up a discreet observation post in the dense woods, a safe distance from the cabin, equipped with powerful telephoto lenses and listening devices. Their mission was to confirm that Jake Morrison was indeed Travis Decker, and to gather intelligence on his movements and any potential associates. For the first 2 days, the cabin remained quiet. The agents watched and waited, their patience tested by the silence and isolation of the forest. They saw no signs of life, and a flicker of doubt began to creep in. Had they followed a false lead? Was the cabin just a decoy? Then, on the third morning, their patience was finally rewarded. The door to the cabin opened, and a man emerged, stepping out into the crisp morning air to stretch. He had grown a thick beard and his hair was longer, but even from a distance there was no mistaking his identity. It was Travis Decker. He looked different, thinner, more tanned, and with a weary, hunted look in his eyes. But it was him. The agents watched him for the next 48 hours, documenting his every move. He lived a solitary, disciplined existence. He would chop wood, go for long runs on the secluded forest trails, and spend hours inside, only occasionally emerging for fresh air. He appeared to be completely alone. There was no sign of the woman from the dating app or any other accomplice. He was cautious, constantly scanning his surroundings, as if he expected to be found at any moment. The surveillance footage captured a man who was not living a life of freedom and excitement, but one of paranoid isolation. The fantasy of becoming Jake Morrison had, it seemed, given way to the stark reality of being a man on the run. The visual confirmation was the final piece of the puzzle. The question was no longer where Travis was or who he had become. The only question that remained was why. What had driven a decorated firefighter and family man to abandon his entire life and retreat into this self-imposed exile? The surveillance provided the irrefutable evidence needed to move in. The FBI now had their man in their sights. The manhunt that had gripped the nation, that had started with an empty truck at a trailhead in Minnesota, was about to reach its dramatic conclusion in the deep woods of northern Wisconsin. The time for watching was over, the time for capture was at hand. The revelation of Travis Decker's double life sent shockwaves through everyone involved in the case, from the investigators to the public that had been following the story with rapt attention. The narrative had been completely upended. This was not a story about a man who was a victim of a crime, but about a man who had perpetrated a massive deception. The heroic firefighter from Redwood Falls was a fraud. He had manipulated everyone, crafting a public persona of dependability and love while secretly plotting his escape. The sympathy that had poured out for him and his family curdled into a mixture of anger and betrayal. The details of his meticulous planning were particularly galling. The secret phone, the encrypted app, the online alias, the prepaid credit cards, and the rented cabin, each element demonstrated a level of forethought and deceit that was deeply unsettling. He had been living two lives in parallel for over a year, carefully balancing his responsibilities in one with his desires in the other. He had lied with every smile, every hug, every promise he made to his family. The disappearance was not an impulsive act but the final, calculated move in a long game of deception. He had not just abandoned his life, he had methodically dismantled it from the inside out, leaving behind a trail of lies. The discovery also raised new, uncomfortable questions about Meredith. If Travis was capable of such a profound and long-term deception, what else had been going on in their marriage? Was it possible that she was a victim after all, not of foul play, but of his gaslighting and manipulation? Or did her own suspicious actions, the life insurance policy, the cash withdrawals, suggest that she was aware of his plans or perhaps had her own secrets? The case was no longer a simple binary of victim and perpetrator. It was now a tangled web of shared deceit, where both husband and wife appeared to be hiding critical truths. With Travis located, the investigation entered a new phase. The focus shifted from finding a missing person to apprehending a fugitive. The manhunt was almost over, but the mystery was far from solved. In fact, it had only deepened. The discovery of his double life did not provide the clean resolution everyone had hoped for. Instead, it exposed the dark, complex underbelly of a seemingly perfect life and a seemingly perfect marriage. Travis Decker was alive, disguised, and alone in a remote cabin. The world now knew where he was, but no one, perhaps not even Travis himself, truly knew who he was or what he was running from. While the FBI was closing in on Travis's hideout in Wisconsin, the investigative team back in Redwood Falls was unraveling a parallel thread of deception. Convinced that Travis's double life did not absolve Meredith of her own suspicious behavior, they continued to dig into her background and communications. The life insurance policy remained a powerful, unexplained motive. To understand her state of mind, they executed a new warrant, this time for her personal phone records, focusing on the period her husband was believed to be a missing person. They were looking for any communication that seemed out of place for a grieving wife, any contact that might reveal a hidden aspect of her own life. It did not take them long to find it. The record showed a pattern of late-night phone calls and a high volume of text messages exchanged with a single number. The contact was not saved under a name, just the raw number, a small but significant act of concealment. The calls were often made after her children were asleep, sometimes lasting for over an hour. This was not the communication pattern of a woman consumed by the search for her missing husband. It was the pattern of someone engaged in a deep, clandestine relationship. A quick check of the phone number's registration revealed its owner, a man named Daniel Porter, Meredith's ex-boyfriend from before she had met Travis. The man she had left behind years ago was suddenly back in the picture at the most crucial of times. This discovery was a bombshell, a secret that Meredith had carefully guarded from both the police and the public. She had her own double life, one that was conducted not through encrypted apps and fake names, but through hushed phone calls in the dead of night. Investigators immediately brought Daniel Porter in for questioning. He was cooperative but nervous, admitting that he and Meredith had reconnected several months before Travis's disappearance. He claimed their relationship was purely platonic, that he was simply offering emotional support to an old friend going through a difficult time. But the frequency and timing of their communication suggested something far more intimate than a simple friendship. The existence of this secret relationship completely reframed Meredith's actions. Her composure during interviews, her distance from the search, and her apparent lack of desperation suddenly made a different kind of sense. Perhaps her calm was not born of guilt or shock, but of preoccupation. Her emotional energy was not solely focused on her missing husband, it was being channeled into a rekindled romance. The narrative of the stoic, grieving wife was shattered. Meredith was not just waiting for Travis to come home. She was potentially building a new life with someone else while the whole world watched her pretend to mourn the old one. The lies in the Decker household were not just Travis's alone. The revelation of Meredith's secret contact with her ex-boyfriend sent investigators back to the beginning, re-examining every statement she had made. They had also been meticulously combing through the family's email accounts, and now they knew what to look for. They uncovered a series of heated email exchanges between Travis and Meredith from the months before he vanished. The emails were a stark chronicle of a marriage in its death throes. They argued viciously about money, with Travis accusing Meredith of reckless spending and hiding purchases from him. He sounded desperate and cornered, referencing the mounting debts and the pressure he felt to keep up appearances. The idyllic family life they projected to the world was a complete fabrication. In these emails, Meredith's replies were cold and dismissive. She accused Travis of being controlling and emotionally distant, of caring more about his reputation at the fire station than his own family. In one particularly venomous exchange, she wrote, "You've checked out of this marriage, so don't pretend you care about the bank account." It was clear their relationship was not just strained, it was toxic, filled with resentment and mutual contempt. The financial troubles were not just a source of stress, they were a weapon they used against each other. The emails provided a powerful, unfiltered glimpse into the bitterness that had taken root in their home, a reality that neither of them had revealed to investigators. Armed with this new evidence, investigators confronted Meredith again. This time her composure cracked. Faced with the printed-out emails and phone records, the facade of the grieving wife crumbled. She admitted that her marriage had been unhappy for years. She confessed that Travis was not the perfect husband everyone believed him to be, describing him as manipulative and secretive. She claimed his disappearance was just another one of his selfish acts, an attempt to punish her and escape his responsibilities. She insisted that her rekindled friendship with Daniel Porter was a lifeline in a miserable marriage, and had nothing to do with Travis vanishing. She was painting herself as a victim, not of a crime, but of a terrible marriage. The whispers that had started among the detectives were now becoming a roar. The case was no longer about one person's deception, but two. Both Travis and Meredith had been living double lives. He had his secret identity and escape plan, she had her secret lover, and a marriage she despised. The lies were interwoven, a complex tapestry of deceit that made it almost impossible to discern the truth. Was Travis running from a miserable marriage, or was Meredith pushing him away? Was the life insurance policy his idea to provide for his family, or her idea to cash in on his absence? The affair, and the lies, had created a fog of doubt so thick that every fact seemed to have an equally plausible and contradictory explanation. The combined revelations of Travis's secret identity and Meredith's affair painted a devastating portrait of a marriage that had disintegrated into a hollow sham. They were not partners, they were adversaries, living under the same roof but operating in separate secret worlds. They were strangers who shared a house and children, but had long since lost any genuine connection. The public image of the happy, loving couple was a meticulously maintained performance for the benefit of their friends, family, and community. Behind closed doors, their home was not a sanctuary of love but a Cold War battleground of resentment, financial stress, and profound emotional neglect. Each was seeking an escape, albeit through different means. Travis's escape was elaborate and physical. He constructed an entire alter ego, Jake Morrison, a man free from the constraints of debt and domestic misery. His escape was about creating a new reality, a fantasy life where he could be adventurous and unburdened. The cabin in Wisconsin was not just a hideout, it was the intended stage for his reinvention. His deception was a proactive, offensive strategy, a meticulously planned operation to shed his old life like a snake sheds its skin. He saw running away as the only solution, a way to reclaim a sense of self that he felt had been eroded by the demands of his life in Redwood Falls. His lies were the building blocks of a new identity. Meredith's escape, in contrast, was emotional and internal. She did not seek to build a new life in a new place, but to find solace and connection within the confines of her existing one. Her affair with Daniel Porter was a retreat, a secret garden where she could feel seen and desired, feelings that were evidently absent from her marriage. Her deception was a defensive strategy, a way to endure an unhappy situation by creating a private emotional buffer. She was not planning to leave, she was trying to survive. Her lies were a shield, protecting her one source of comfort from the harsh reality of her daily life and the prying eyes of her husband and community. These two parallel deceptions likely fed off each other, creating a vicious cycle of secrecy and distance. Travis's emotional withdrawal and secret life may have pushed Meredith towards her ex-boyfriend for comfort. Conversely, Meredith's own emotional detachment and secret communications may have reinforced Travis's belief that his only option was to disappear completely. They were two people in a last one to leave turns out the lights scenario, both plotting their exit in their own way. Their marriage had become a prison of their own making, and each had been secretly digging a tunnel, unaware of the other's efforts until the walls came crashing down. As these sordid details of the Deckers' marriage became public, the case exploded on social media and in the national news, transforming from a mystery into a messy public divorce played out on a national stage. The story was no longer just about a manhunt, it was a deeply divisive human drama, and everyone had an opinion. The public, which had once been united in sympathy for the family, now fractured into distinct camps, each fiercely defending their chosen protagonist. The case became a cultural Rorschach test, reflecting people's own views on marriage, betrayal, and victimhood. The court of public opinion was in session, and the arguments were loud, passionate, and relentless. On one side was Team Travis. His supporters saw him as a man driven to desperation by a miserable marriage and crushing financial pressure. They argued that Meredith's affair and cold, dismissive emails proved she was a neglectful, possibly unfaithful, wife who had pushed him over the edge. In this narrative, Travis was the true victim, a good man who had made a drastic choice to escape an unbearable situation. They pointed to his years of service as a firefighter as evidence of his fundamental good character. His elaborate escape plan was viewed not as a malicious deception, but as a cry for help, the only way he could see to break free from a life that was suffocating him. Opposing them was Team Meredith. Her defenders saw her as a woman trapped in a marriage with a manipulative, secretive man who was gaslighting her while planning to abandon his family. They argued that her affair was a symptom of Travis's neglect, not the cause of their problems. To them, Travis was a narcissistic con man who had planned to cruelly desert his wife and children, leaving them with a mountain of debt and the emotional trauma of his staged disappearance. The life insurance policy, they claimed, was just another one of his manipulations, a way to make her look guilty. Meredith was a victim of his long-term emotional abuse, and her only crime was seeking a moment of happiness in a loveless marriage. This intense public debate was fueled by a constant stream of leaks and updates from the investigation. Reddit threads became battlegrounds, with users dissecting every new piece of information to support their chosen side. TikTok videos presented compelling and often wildly speculative theories that went viral, further cementing the public's divisions. The case touched a nerve, tapping into deep-seated anxieties about trust and the secrets that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most perfect-looking relationships. The Travis Decker manhunt was no longer just a true crime story. It had become a national obsession, a modern-day morality play with no clear heroes or villains. As the FBI prepared to apprehend Travis, the full, messy picture had finally come into focus. The investigation had stripped away the layers of public persona and idyllic imagery to reveal a rotten core. The truth was not a simple matter of one person being the villain and the other the victim. The truth was that both Travis and Meredith Decker were deceivers, each guilty of profound betrayal, albeit in different ways. They were co-conspirators in the destruction of their own marriage, and their shared lies had created the very mystery that the nation was now trying to solve. The manhunt for Travis had inadvertently become an excavation of a toxic relationship. Travis's crime was one of grand, calculated deception. He had orchestrated a massive fraud against his community, his employer, and his own family. His actions were selfish and destructive, causing immense emotional pain and wasting a fortune in public resources. He had chosen to run from his problems rather than face them, abandoning his children and his responsibilities in the most dramatic way possible. His lies were active and structural, designed to build a new life on a foundation of falsehoods. He was a fugitive from the law, but more fundamentally, he was a fugitive from the truth of his own life and the choices he had made. Meredith's crime was one of emotional betrayal and duplicity. While she had not broken any laws in the same way Travis had, her actions were a crucial part of the story's fabric. She had lied to the police, to the public, and likely to herself. She had maintained the facade of a grieving wife while secretly communicating with another man. Her lies were passive and protective, designed to conceal her own unhappiness and her emotional infidelity. While she may not have been legally culpable in his disappearance, she was morally compromised, a participant in the web of deceit that defined their marriage. Her hands were not clean. In the end, the affair and the lies were two sides of the same coin. They were the symptoms of a marriage that had failed so completely that both partners felt their only recourse was to live a double life. The investigation had started with a simple question: where is Travis Decker? But it had uncovered a far more complex and troubling answer. He was in a cabin in Wisconsin, but he had been lost long before that, adrift in a sea of his own making. The final truth was not about a single affair or a single lie, but about the devastating consequences that unfold when two people who once promised to be honest with each other choose instead to become strangers. The decision to move in on Travis Decker was made with tactical precision. After days of covert surveillance confirming his identity and solitary existence, the FBI assembled a tactical team for the apprehension. The operation was scheduled for dawn on August 4, 2025, 19 days after he had vanished from Redwood Falls. The setting itself presented a unique challenge. The cabin was nestled deep within the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, a sprawling expanse of dense woodland, lakes, and rugged terrain. There was only one narrow, unpaved track leading to the property, making a surprise vehicle approach impossible. The team would have to move in on foot, under the cover of the pre-dawn darkness, to maintain the element of surprise that was crucial for a safe and successful capture. The air in the Wisconsin woods was cold and still, as the team began their final approach. They moved like ghosts through the towering pines, their night vision goggles casting the world in an eerie green glow. Every snapped twig or rustle of leaves was a potential giveaway, a sound that could alert the paranoid and vigilant man they were there to arrest. The agents were highly trained, their movements fluid and silent, a testament to countless hours of practice. They knew Travis was a firefighter, physically fit and resourceful. They did not underestimate him. Their primary objective was to take him into custody without incident, to prevent him from fleeing further into the vast wilderness, or worse, attempting to harm himself or the agents. As they formed a perimeter around the small rustic cabin, the tension was palpable. The first faint light of dawn was beginning to filter through the canopy, outlining the silhouette of the structure against the dark woods. Inside, Travis Decker was asleep, oblivious to the net that was closing in around him. The agents took their positions, covering all windows and the single door. A negotiator was on standby, but the primary plan was a swift, dynamic entry to overwhelm him before he had a chance to react. The silence of the forest was about to be shattered. The long nationwide manhunt, which had begun with a quiet disappearance, was about to end with a loud and decisive show of force. The final moments before the raid were filled with a tense, focused silence. The team leader gave the final signals, a series of hand gestures that communicated the plan without a single word. Each agent knew their role, their point of entry, and their responsibility. They were a coordinated unit, ready to bring an end to the deception that had captivated and divided a nation. The man inside the cabin was no longer Jake Morrison, the adventurous consultant, nor was he Travis Decker, the heroic firefighter. He was a federal fugitive, a man who had run out of places to hide. The Wisconsin woods, which he had chosen as his sanctuary, were about to become his prison. With the first rays of sunlight piercing the morning mist, the command was given. FBI, open the door! The shout, amplified by a megaphone, ripped through the tranquil forest, followed instantly by the percussive sound of a battering ram smashing against the cabin's wooden door. The lock splintered, and the door flew inwards, revealing the dark, cramped interior. Agents swarmed into the small space, their weapons drawn and powerful torches cutting through the gloom. "Show me your hands! Get down on the ground, now!" The commands were loud, authoritative, and overlapping, designed to disorient and intimidate, leaving no room for thought or resistance. It was a maelstrom of controlled chaos unleashed in a matter of seconds. Inside, Travis was jolted from sleep into a state of pure terror. The world had transformed from a silent, peaceful slumber into a terrifying assault of shouting and blinding lights. He was on his feet in an instant, his heart pounding in his chest, but he was hopelessly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. He saw the figures in tactical gear, the glint of their weapons, and knew immediately that his time was up. There was no escape. The agents found him standing by his makeshift bed, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. He was wearing nothing but shorts, his face pale with shock beneath his new, thick beard. The hunted look the surveillance team had noted was now one of utter defeat. He offered no resistance. As the agents secured him, forcing him to the floor and cuffing his hands tightly behind his back, he was completely compliant. The man who had meticulously planned every detail of his escape had apparently given no thought to this inevitable eventuality. As he was led out of the cabin and into the daylight, blinking against the sudden brightness, the full reality of his situation seemed to crash down on him. The agents conducted a quick sweep of the cabin, finding little more than basic survival gear, non-perishable food, running shoes, and a small stack of books. There were no weapons, no large sums of cash, no evidence of any accomplice. He had been living a Spartan, solitary existence. The capture itself was over in less than 5 minutes. It was a textbook operation, efficient and without injury. As Travis was escorted through the woods towards the waiting vehicles, he remained silent, his eyes fixed on the forest floor. The man who had held the nation's attention for weeks was now just another suspect in handcuffs, his grand deception having crumbled into a humiliating and public arrest. The cameras that had once broadcast his wife's tearful pleas would soon be broadcasting images of his own perp walk. The capture marked the end of the manhunt, but it was only the beginning of the next chapter, one that would be dominated by his side of the story. Once in custody and transported to the nearest FBI field office, Travis Decker began to talk. The transformation was remarkable. The defiant, secretive man who had created Jake Morrison seemed to vanish, replaced by a person who appeared broken, exhausted, and surprisingly, terrified. Stripped of his beard and dressed in a standard-issue jumpsuit, he looked less like a cunning fugitive and more like a man who had been through a profound ordeal. During his initial interrogation, he was not defiant or manipulative. Instead, he was emotional, his voice often cracking as he recounted the events that led him to the cabin in Wisconsin. He did not deny staging his own disappearance. He admitted to it freely, but the reason he gave was shocking. He claimed he had run for his life. Travis alleged that his wife, Meredith, was not the grieving spouse she appeared to be, but a cold and calculating woman who had threatened to kill him. He painted a chilling picture of their marriage, one that went far beyond the arguments over money found in their emails. He described a relationship filled with escalating psychological abuse, where Meredith controlled every aspect of his life, isolated him from friends, and constantly belittled him. He claimed she had become increasingly erratic and threatening in the months leading up to his disappearance, and that he genuinely feared for his safety. He was not running from responsibility, he was running from a domestic nightmare. The life insurance policy, he insisted, was entirely her idea. He claimed Meredith had pushed for it relentlessly, framing it as a necessity for the family's security. In retrospect, he now saw it as a key part of her plan. He told investigators that he believed she intended to have him killed, making it look like an accident, so she could collect the $1.2 million and start a new life with her rekindled flame, Daniel Porter. His disappearance, he argued, was a desperate, preemptive act of self-preservation. He felt he had no other choice. Going to the police in Redwood Falls was not an option, he claimed, because no one would have believed that the beloved town hero was a victim of domestic abuse at the hands of his wife. His story was a stunning reversal of the narrative that had been building against him. He was not a con man, he was a victim. He was not abandoning his children, he was ensuring he would stay alive for them. The empty locker, the burner phone, the secret cabin, these were not tools of a deceitful escape, but the desperate measures of a man who felt his life was in imminent danger. His performance was compelling, filled with raw emotion and specific, harrowing details. The investigators, who had been certain they had captured a manipulative narcissist, were now faced with a man claiming to be a terrified victim of domestic blackmail. The case had just been turned completely on its head, again. The news of Travis's capture, and his explosive allegations against Meredith created, well, a legal and public relations firestorm. His story, relayed to the media through his newly appointed defense lawyer, was a bombshell that landed right in the middle of an already divided public. It was, honestly, a narrative that was perfectly crafted to engender sympathy and reframe his actions from those of a villain to those of a survivor. His lawyer portrayed him as a man cornered by a manipulative and dangerous spouse, forced to take extraordinary measures to save his own life. The focus immediately shifted back to Meredith, who was now facing accusations far more serious than just having an affair. Meredith's response was swift and unequivocal. Through her own legal team, she vehemently denied all of Travis's allegations, branding them as the desperate lies of a cornered criminal. Her lawyer issued a powerful public statement. Mr. Decker is a proven liar and manipulator who abandoned his wife and children. Now that he has been caught, he is attempting to deflect blame by concocting a vile and slanderous fantasy. He is victimizing his wife all over again, this time in the full glare of the public eye. Meredith Decker is the true victim here, and we are confident that the evidence will expose his claims for what they are, a pathetic attempt to escape the consequences of his own selfish actions. The result was, honestly, a complete standoff. A case of he said, she said, on a national scale. There were now two diametrically opposed stories, each presented with conviction and passion. On one side, a terrified husband fleeing a murderous plot. On the other, a manipulative fugitive slandering his innocent wife to save himself. Both narratives were plausible within the twisted context of their failed marriage. Both Travis and Meredith had been proven to be liars, which made it, impossible for the public or the authorities to know who was lying now. Every piece of evidence could be interpreted to support either version of events, creating a legal quagmire. The capture of Travis Decker, which should have brought clarity and resolution, had only plunged the case into deeper confusion. The question was no longer simply about what had happened, but about who to believe. Was Travis a victim of domestic blackmail, a man who had to fake his own disappearance to escape a deadly threat? Or was Meredith being set up by a narcissistic husband, who was now using the ultimate lie to cover his tracks and destroy her reputation in the process? The manhunt was over, but the real battle, the battle for the truth, was just beginning, and it was destined to be fought not in the woods, but in a courtroom. With Travis Decker in custody and Meredith Decker vehemently denying his allegations, the legal system had to move forward. The case had become a tangled web of accusations and counter-accusations, but prosecutors needed to cut through the noise and build a case based on provable facts. After weeks of reviewing the mountain of evidence gathered by the FBI and local police, the district attorney's office made a bold and controversial decision. They announced that they would be charging both Travis and Meredith. It was a move that honestly surprised many legal experts who had expected the prosecution to pick a side and build their case around a single coherent narrative. Instead, they chose to pursue both of them, a strategy that reflected the deep ambiguity of the case. Travis faced the most serious charges. He was indicted on multiple felonies, including insurance fraud for his role in the $1.2 million policy, making false statements to federal investigators, and causing an endangerment, which encompassed the massive and costly manhunt his actions had triggered. The prosecution's case against him was strong, built on a foundation of his own admitted actions. The empty locker, the secret identity, the burner phone, and the Wisconsin cabin were all irrefutable facts. His defense, that he was a victim of domestic blackmail, would have to be incredibly compelling to overcome the weight of the evidence that he had knowingly and willingly perpetrated a massive deception. Meredith, while not facing charges as severe as Travis's, was also indicted. The prosecution charged her with insurance fraud, alleging that she was a knowing participant in the scheme to illegitimately collect on the policy. They also charged her with making false statements to law enforcement during the initial stages of the investigation, when she had concealed her affair and the true state of their marriage. The case against her was more circumstantial, relying heavily on the timing of the policy, her unexplained cash withdrawals, and the lies she had told. Her defense would argue she was a pawn in her husband's game, a victim of his manipulation who had made poor choices under duress. The decision to charge both parties set the stage for an extraordinary legal battle. It meant that Travis and Meredith, the two people at the center of the mystery, would effectively be on trial together, yet against each other. Each of their defense teams would have to prove their client's innocence by simultaneously proving the other's guilt. The courtroom would become the final arena for their toxic marriage, a place where all their secrets, lies, and betrayals would be laid bare for a jury to untangle. The aftermath of the manhunt was not a quiet period of reflection, but the beginning of a new, public war between the two people who knew the whole truth. As the legal proceedings lumbered forward, the court of public opinion was already in full swing, delivering daily verdicts on television and social media. The trial of Travis and Meredith Decker became one of the most highly anticipated legal events in recent memory, a real-life soap opera with incredibly high stakes. News networks provided wall-to-wall coverage, with legal analysts dissecting every pre-trial motion and newly released piece of evidence. The public remained deeply and passionately divided, with Team Travis and Team Meredith solidifying their positions. The media frenzy turned Redwood Falls into a permanent encampment for reporters, its small-town courthouse transformed into a national stage for the unfolding drama. The competing narratives put forth by the defense teams were amplified and endlessly debated. Travis's lawyer continued to paint him as a terrified man who had fled a potentially deadly situation, a victim of a form of abuse that was rarely discussed or understood. This narrative resonated with many who felt that male victims of domestic abuse were often ignored by the system. Meredith's lawyers, meanwhile, portrayed her as the ultimate victim, a woman betrayed by a narcissistic husband who then tried to destroy her with a final despicable lie. This story tapped into powerful cultural archetypes, earning her a legion of fierce supporters. The intense media scrutiny had a profound effect on the case itself. Selecting an impartial jury became a monumental task. Finding 12 people who had not already formed a strong opinion was nearly impossible. The jury selection process was long and arduous, with lawyers using their challenges to weed out anyone who seemed to lean too heavily towards the opposing narrative. The pressure on the chosen jurors was immense. They were deciding the fate of 2 people and delivering a verdict that would be scrutinized by millions. This trial by media created an environment where the truth seemed secondary to the story. Both legal teams were arguing not just to the jury, but to the public at large. Their press conferences were carefully choreographed, their sound bites crafted for maximum impact. The case became less about evidence, and more about which side could tell the more compelling story. The line between legal strategy and public relations blurred completely. The Decker trial was a landmark case for the digital age, a demonstration of how public perception could shape the narrative of justice before a single witness had even taken the stand. The trial began in early 2026, and from the opening statements, it was clear this would be a brutal and deeply personal legal fight. The prosecution laid out its case methodically, arguing that this was a simple story of greed and deception. They presented evidence of the Deckers' shared financial desperation, and portrayed the insurance policy as a joint scheme to defraud the system. They argued that when the plan went awry, Travis and Meredith turned on each other, each trying to frame the other to save themselves. The prosecution's narrative was that there were no victims here, only 2 co-conspirators whose greed had led them to this courtroom. It was a clean, if cynical, theory of the case. Travis's defense team went on the offensive immediately. They called him to the stand, where he gave a tearful and compelling testimony, recounting the alleged abuse he suffered at Meredith's hands. He described her as having a Jekyll and Hyde personality, capable of charming everyone in public while being a cruel and manipulative tyrant in private. His lawyer presented emails where Meredith's language was cold and cutting, and he argued that Travis's actions, the secret phone, the cabin, were not signs of guilt, but of a desperate man creating a survival plan. The defense aimed to make the jury feel Travis's fear, to convince them that any reasonable person in his position would have done the same thing. When Meredith took the stand, her defense team presented an equally powerful counter-narrative. She was poised and articulate, portraying herself as a long-suffering wife who had been emotionally abandoned by a secretive and distant husband. She admitted to the affair but framed it as a mistake born of loneliness and desperation. Her lawyer fiercely attacked Travis's credibility, listing every lie he had told and every deception he had perpetrated. They argued that his claims of abuse were a fabrication, a smokescreen designed to hide his own selfish plan to abandon his family. They painted Meredith as a flawed but honest woman who had been systematically deceived by a master manipulator. The courtroom became a theater of conflicting realities. Friends, family members, and colleagues were called to testify, and their evidence was often filtered through the lens of their personal loyalty, supporting one side or the other. Financial experts argued over bank statements, and psychologists offered competing theories on the couple's personalities. The jury was presented with 2 perfectly constructed, mutually exclusive stories. They were asked to look at the same set of facts, the insurance policy, the emails, the secret lives, and decide which narrative was the truth. The battle was not over the evidence itself, but over its interpretation, a high-stakes war of perception. After weeks of testimony and a grueling presentation of evidence, the case finally went to the jury. The 16 hours of deliberation were a tense and anxious period for everyone involved. The length of the deliberation suggested the jurors were deeply divided, likely struggling to reconcile the 2 powerful narratives they had been presented with. They were locked in a room, tasked with untangling a web of lies that had been spun over years, trying to find a thread of truth strong enough to support a verdict beyond a reasonable doubt. The entire nation seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the 12 ordinary citizens to pass judgment on the extraordinary case of Travis and Meredith Decker. When the jury finally filed back into the courtroom, the tension was unbearable. The foreman handed the verdict to the clerk, who read it aloud in a clear, steady voice. On the charges against Meredith Decker, the verdict was not guilty. The jury had acquitted her on all counts. A wave of relief washed over Meredith, who broke down in quiet sobs, hugging her lawyer. The prosecution had failed to convince the jury that she was a willing participant in the insurance fraud scheme. Her narrative, that she was a victim of her husband's manipulations, had won out. For the law, if not for the public, she was an innocent woman. The verdict for Travis Decker was different. The jury found him guilty. He was convicted of insurance fraud and causing an endangerment. His story of being a terrified victim, while emotionally compelling, was not enough to overcome the mountain of physical evidence of his meticulous planning and deceit. He sat motionless as the verdict was read, his face a mask of resignation. He was later sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, a significant but not maximum sentence that perhaps reflected the jury's own ambivalence about the case. The man who had tried to disappear from his life was now legally and physically removed from it, his elaborate escape ending in a prison cell. The verdicts brought a legal conclusion to the case, but they did little to settle the public debate. For many, the split verdict felt unsatisfying, a compromise that did not reflect the whole truth. Supporters of Travis were outraged, believing the jury had been swayed by a manipulative woman. Supporters of Meredith felt vindicated, but many believed Travis's sentence was too lenient. The case of Travis Decker left an indelible mark on Redwood Falls, a permanent scar on the town's psyche. It was a story that exposed the dark fragility of trust and the terrifying secrets that can hide behind the most perfect of facades, leaving everyone to wonder if they ever really know the people they love. In the end, the Travis Decker manhunt concluded not with a satisfying resolution, but with a lingering and profound sense of ambiguity. The legal system delivered its verdicts, closing the official case file, yet the core questions that captivated a nation remained stubbornly unanswered. Was Travis Decker a cunning con man, a narcissist who callously abandoned his family and concocted a vile lie to cover his tracks? Or was he a terrified victim of insidious abuse, a man pushed to the brink who saw a staged disappearance as his only path to survival? The jury made its choice, but in the court of public opinion the debate rages on, a testament to the complex and contradictory evidence that defined this extraordinary case. The story's legacy is not one of clarity, but of a deep and unsettling doubt that challenges our ability to ever truly know what happens behind closed doors. The case became a modern parable about the nature of truth in an age of curated identities and public performances. Both Travis and Meredith Decker were masterful storytellers, each crafting a compelling narrative of victimhood that resonated with millions. Their saga exposed the terrifying fragility of trust and the ease with which love can curdle into betrayal and contempt. It revealed how a marriage can become a silent battleground, a prison of secrets and lies where both partners are simultaneously captive and warden. The story of their shared deception serves as a chilling reminder that the lives we present to the world are often just that, a presentation, a carefully edited version of a far more complicated and often darker reality. The most enduring mystery is not where Travis went, but how two people could lose themselves and each other so completely. For the town of Redwood Falls, the fallout was permanent. The community that had once rallied together to find its lost hero was left fractured and forever changed by the ugly truths that were unearthed. The case acted as a mirror, forcing the town to look at itself and confront the uncomfortable possibility that darkness could fester even in the most idyllic of settings. The name Travis Decker, once a symbol of civic pride and heroism, is now a byword for deceit, a painful reminder of their collective betrayal. The story has been absorbed into the town's folklore, a cautionary tale whispered to future generations about the secrets neighbors can keep and the danger of believing in perfect lives. Redwood Falls never truly recovered its sense of tranquil security. A shadow of doubt now hangs over its quiet, tree-lined streets. Ultimately, the Travis Decker manhunt transcends the specifics of one couple's toxic relationship. It became a cultural touchstone, a case study for true crime enthusiasts, psychology students, and anyone fascinated by the dark complexities of the human soul. It demonstrated the power of media to shape a narrative and the public's insatiable appetite for a drama with clear heroes and villains, even when none exist. The story endures because it is not just about them, it is about us. It holds up a mirror to our own fears about trust, our anxieties about the people we love, and the terrifying knowledge that beneath any placid surface, a turbulent and unknowable world may lie in wait. The mystery of Travis Decker is enduring because it is, in some small way, the mystery of ourselves.